And welcome. I'm here joined today with the lovely,
Charlie from AppPeak.
and my name is Josh from Blue Throne. And me and Charlie spend pretty much all of our time talking to app developers, both big, medium, and small. And we're pretty good mates, and we've kind of realized that there's a few really interesting points that are taking place in this very fast changing world of app growth, development, buying, and selling. And we wanted to basically leverage some of the insights we have and dive into some of the really interesting things we're seeing in this market of buying and selling app businesses. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. We're going to be talking about really the state of mobile app acquisitions in 2025. And we're not just talking about this because it's our day job. This has become a really, really big industry very, very quickly. And it's partly fueled by this rise in AI apps, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it's also fueled by the pure number of apps in the ecosystem are growing. The way they're able to generate revenue is changing and becoming much, much easier. Consumers are much more comfortable paying subscriptions for these apps we use on our phone, whether it's a dating or a utility or a finance app. So the whole market is really, really picking up. And I wanted to kind of put this question to you, Charlie. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of buyers, new buyers enter the market. Just wondered, what is the typical kind of buyer persona you're seeing from your side?
Yeah, Josh, thanks for the intro there. In terms of on the buyer persona, so I would say recently, I don't know if you feel the same way on this, but there's a lot of the new buyers that are coming aren't traditionally from apps. They're coming from a lot of different places. So in the last 6 months, I've seen a lot of people who are in mobile games traditionally, and they're switching now to consumer subscription mobile apps. A lot of that being, I think the fact that like the mobile game industry is sort of plateauing and evening out there in terms of the spend in it. So those people now seeing the growth in the consumer subscription side, they're like, let's move into there. I think as well then with the forecasting of subscription mobile apps, it's a lot easier to do and see a return on investment compared to something like games where it's a lot of advertising revenue. But that's probably the biggest one in terms of recently in the last couple of months, the big shift I'm seeing or the new buyer entering the market. But
Yeah, we've
yeah, on
definitely
your
seen
side,
that.
how's it looking?
Definitely seen that at our side as well, more buyers from the mobile gaming industry. But it kind of, I'm also seeing it go a bit deeper than that. We're seeing really like strategic buyers, not just in the form of mobile gaming companies, but roll-up companies, aggregator companies buying up different consumer apps for various reasons. We're also seeing large-scale buyers from the likes of the private equity folks who are looking for like really secure cash flows, to buyers who might be strategic but don't have a foothold in mobile, and so they're actually going to buy a mobile app in order to get access to that mobile audience. They could be, a web company, for example, but they don't want to try and build their own mobile app. They'd rather buy something with audience already there, and they're also very, very interested. And I think I'd love to know what you think about this, but as we move down the kind of check sizes and we get to smaller checks, buying smaller apps, the scope of different people who are buying these things gets wider and wider. You probably have some great points because you probably talked to these guys. What are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, it was kind of one of the points I was going to jump into there. So I think with the those sort of gaming buyers, I definitely see them looking at the smaller deals, probably something around the 250K to million check size and buying those sort of apps. If it is a larger size one where it's more strategic, one where a private equity player is getting involved, they're typically over 1 million in profit annually or above. It's something where for the amount of work that they would put into it, especially if it's strategic, they would want to see that it's a bigger size like that. But then those smaller ones, that kind of 250 to million check size, it is those traditional aggregator buyers. In terms of for them, they see that they can get a multiple on it if they increase it, do a couple of quick fixes like paywalls, onboarding, testing the pricing. As well, you will have mobile app studios that are down around that range. Let's say, for example, you have a studio there and they're in health and fitness apps. They have a lot of apps that are in certain niches there. So they know with the distribution list that they have, if they buy something that's complementary to that, they can cross market to that user base they'd acquire. So it's very interesting for them in terms of the upside that they can get. So those studios, aggregators, kind of buyers coming from gaming, I think they're looking at the smaller ones versus the other buyers we mentioned.
I completely agree. And I think to kind of summarize it into a sentence, in apps, everyone's a buyer because the prices really vary from kind of small to large. It's so wide that everyone can really be a buyer. So yeah, I completely kind of agree. And there's also another thing we didn't touch on, which is the kind of furthest piece on the bottom of the food chain, which is individuals, wealthy individuals looking to invest some money, whether they're buying an app for a couple of $100,000. Rarely do they go up to 1 million, but I'm sure it does happen. And then also founders, app founders, or even mobile gaming founders who have had their exit, maybe a small to medium size exit in the space of 1 to 20 million. And they're saying, hey, like, where do I put this money? I don't want to put it into a bank. I might do some angel investing, but I actually understand these businesses. So I can then spot an opportunity better than someone else. And then these individuals are also probably coming and picking up some of these deals.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of go through like a quick fire, frequently asked questions when it comes to exiting and like selling an app. As this is what you're doing pretty much every day. This is what I'm doing every day. Obviously, you're on the brokerage side, I'm on the buying side, but we're both dealing with the same kind of nuts and bolts. In your experience, how long does it take to sell an app from that first conversation to actually getting the money in your bank account?
Yes, we created a valuation report for 2024. So any of the apps that were bought or sold, we sent it out to any app buyer or app owner that we would know, and they kind of filled out the data on that. We're seeing the most typical time frame from the first buyer intro to when they actually sold was the range was between 61 to 90 days. So it's in that sort of sweet spot is where we're seeing deals being done mostly. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this, but if it drags out longer than that, from my personal experience, we're seeing that happening in the due diligence. So it's if the app owner is slow to respond to stuff, the legal documents that are done there, if there's a bit of back and forth on that, it tends to drag it out. But in terms of the initial assessment from the buyer intros, that stuff's all done pretty quickly. And I think at the tail end of it, you get it drawn out from that kind of perspective on it.
And do you see a correlation between size of the deal and how long it takes to close it?
I would say, yeah, typically if you're to look at it, generally apples to apples comparison, larger deals are typically taking longer. That would come into a lot of stuff like typically if you're a larger app, you have more people on payroll. As well as that, there's a lot more typically complexity. If you have a back end in it for managing stuff, if it's a bigger app, bigger apps just generally have more stuff like that that's included in it that needs to be assessed. So from the buyer looking into all these different things in due diligence, it just takes a bit longer.
Yeah, that also tracks with what we're seeing. I mean, the bigger the deal, the more complex the team, the more complex the back end takes longer. Another reason I think can really impact the time it takes to close the deal, and in many ways this is the biggest reason I think, is the motivation of the seller. I mean, you have these kind of app owners who have been building these apps for years and they're very attached to them, rightly so. They've spent a lot of late nights trying to build these things into what they have finally achieved. And it really comes down to how motivated are they to sell. Some app sellers want to explore a price to kind of see what the app is worth, but actually when it comes to crunch time, they're not ready to part ways with the app. Whereas other guys enter the process saying, listen, I've mentally reached that point where I'm ready to sell. I want the money to buy a house, put my kid through college, start a new project. And so also I think there's this like sliding scale of motivation or intent to sell. And I think, I've been doing M&A for almost 5 years now, and I think it's not sales. You cannot persuade someone to sell their baby or part ways with their baby. Either they do or they don't want to. And there's obviously a gray area in the middle where someone could be on the fence and you could help show them what life would look like with a sale and without. But if someone doesn't have the motivation to sell, it's rare that you can persuade them. But obviously you're coming at this from the brokerage perspective. So am I correct in saying that most people you talk to have already reached that point of mind, or is there some flip-flopping there?
So you'll get people, okay, and they initially come into the process and they want to sell. I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on this after, but if it's one where somebody's owned that for a long time, they have maybe 2 or 3 apps, or this is their sole app, for example, there's much more of an emotional attachment there. So a lot of the times they can tell you, okay, I'm potentially interested in selling the app. But then when you get to that late stage in the process where you're talking about numbers and signing contracts, it becomes a much more different situation compared to when you're actually discussing the high level numbers. So I find with those ones, it is hard to kind of gauge how motivated the app owner is, especially because it's such an emotional transaction for them. Whereas we have a lot of app owners then where they could have a big studio of apps, they're pumping out a lot of apps, and there's no emotional attachment. It's much more kind of a business transaction and trying to sell that quickly and get a good price for it. So it does vary a lot in that situation, but I find more if this is their sole app or they've been doing it for a long time, the emotional attachment there and trying to get them to sell is harder.
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying. And I just would have thought that if people are approaching you as a broker, they have reached some level of conclusion in their mind that they're ready to sell. But also on our side, we see deals fall apart towards the end because people realize that they don't want to lose this thing they spent so long working on. And at that point, there's really not a lot you can do. If that's how they feel, that's really how they feel. And like I said before, it's not a game of sales. It's really a game of partnerships, making both people happy at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Do you ever have a scenario where you'll give kind of product-based feedback to an app that you're trying to sell? Like if you see a way where they could increase their valuation by just implementing a couple of things, Do you ever give that feedback and try and help them upgrade the product based on what you see?
Product wise, I think the big thing for us would be you would see people with one time purchase apps, and if it's something like that where they've never tried to flip it to subscription, it would be asked them if they've ever experimented with it or thought about doing that. I'm sure you've probably seen it as well, but maybe, when I first started doing this 3 years ago, there was a lot more one time purchase apps and people buying them, flipping them to subscription and improving the LTVs. If it's something like that, we would try to tell them to make changes to that, but more into the details in terms of actual product in the app and making those changes. It's something where we wouldn't really go too in depth with. I think we help them sell, we get them ready for the sell, and then we sort of leave it at that. We don't get much more granular, I would say.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, one of the most exciting parts about the app business right now is that developers and studios are finding ways, finally, to really deepen these LTVs. I mean, typically with a subscription app that has kind of moved past that one-time purchase you were just talking about, there's this kind of cliff of monetization where either you're doing the kind of weekly, monthly, annual, or lifetime subscription, and so your LTVs are very much a four-step ladder, and there's no nuance in between the points. And I think I'm finally starting to see some really incredible apps introduce hybrid monetization, a lot of techniques they've lifted from gaming. Some are using loot boxes, some are using power-ups, some are using consumables. A lot more apps are now introducing not just ads, but like smart ads, rewarded ads, interstitial ads, very different types of ads as opposed to just banners, which we saw a lot kind of in the last 5 to 10 years, if not longer. So by implementing these strategies, we're seeing LTVs deepen, which is great because that also kind of frees up some space when you're buying traffic. It gives you a little bit more wiggle room. I think this is a really key development in the app industry in general, because of something that if you've had coffee with me in the last 10 months, you've heard me say this, but what I'm saying to a lot of people I meet, especially the VCs, is like, there isn't that many examples of the trodden path from an app company going from zero to unicorn. Like, we can count on one hand. It's like Duolingo, there's Lightricks, there's Flow, for example, but there really aren't that many. And I think one of the problems has been this like depth of LTV. With mobile gaming, for example, you had a deeper LTV. You could just, once you'd found product market fit, you just scale in marketing. That doesn't work as well in consumer because your LTV is being capped. But now people have found a way to deepen the LTV. There's more of a chance of hitting those much, much higher valuations. And so that leads me to actually make a bit of a prediction here, which is I think we're going to see the general valuation of consumer app companies being sold, either you selling them or me buying them, increase over the next two to 3 years as these techniques become more permeated into the industry. So I'm kind of looking, well, you're probably looking forward to that because it's a better commission. I'm not looking forward to that because I got to pay more for the deal.
Yeah, it's definitely different in terms of the incentive there for the two of us. I'm kind of just you touching on the hybrid model there. I'm wondering which one do you find is performing the best, or what if you're looking at different deals and hybrid models across apps you're buying, which one is the most interesting one you'd want to see?
It's a great question. I can't comment on any deals we're currently looking at, but I think the main point I would highlight here is it really depends on the app, what is happening within the app. Is there a way you can gamify progress, which then leads you down a path of can you use consumables, can you use power-ups? And the kind of biggest piece of advice I'd give to founders who want to explore this angle is just become a gamer for a couple of weeks, go really deep into Candy Crush, go really deep into Clash of Clans, and try and copy what they're doing. Think about where they've got the currency sinks, where they're really making a hard paywall. If it's a puzzle game, at what point do they make the puzzle so hard that you have to buy a power-up?
Yeah.
Really try and learn from these guys that have done it really, really well. But I think the main point is it really depends on the category you're playing in. Another example is if you're in like something physical where you're outside or AR category, like you could also do like location-based advertising, which is like another way to deepen LTVs. It really depends on the category, I think, is the biggest answer to that.
Yeah, it is. It's super interesting though, especially the gamification piece. So at this app owner, and we were helping him to sell, there was kind of a multiple we were discussing with a buyer, and he ended up bringing in rewarded ads for a lot of free users. There's a lot of people that were sitting there using the app, but then not actually converting to paying. But then with these, he ended up doing it where if they came online every day, they would create a streak, kind of like you'd see in Duolingo. But then on top of that, it ended up being that they would get more free usage for every day they accumulated. So in terms of that, the engagement just went through the roof and he monetized these free users better. But yeah, that hybrid then between just relying on everyone to convert to pay, I think it's definitely just not utilizing or monetizing the full potential of the audience you have, and he did a good job with it.
Yeah, for sure. And it actually reminds me of something from my days in gaming when I was doing M&A for Plarium, which is a big mobile gaming company, we used to have to play all these games for research. And there was one game that I adored called Mr. Autofire. It was made by a company around Scandinavia, a company called Lightheart Entertainment. Now you can't even see that. Anyway, they put in a rewarded ad just when you died. So you'd actually end up looking forward to this rewarded ad because it would allow you to keep playing the game. It was a roguelike. And so typically when ads are very frustrating for the user, it ends up becoming this thing you're looking forward to, which is obviously going to bump up the CPM, which is very, very exciting if you're that developer. Completely agree. It can be like a really strong tool in the toolkit if you get it right. The main problem is like it's not always obvious where to put these ads in your app and where to give the reward if there is a reward to give. That takes a bit more of a depth in product.
Yeah, a bit of testing around it as well to see.
Yeah. I wanted to jump in a completely different topic here, but really just talk about what kind of costs should a seller be expecting if they're going to be selling their app. Let's say they come to you and they say, listen, I've scaled to, I don't know, 100K MRR. What kind of costs should I expect on my P&L if I'm going to actually sell this app and go through with it properly?
Yeah, so the costs you'd have there, I would say obviously you'd have, if we're bringing you to market and we're carrying out the whole service, we would have a commission we would charge. As well as that, then you would have using an escrow agent and setting it up. This is just for anyone who doesn't know, or this is kind of techno babble and you've never really explored the idea. It's an intermediary between yourself and the buyer if you're selling the app. And that just kind of creates the trust there. So the buyer transfers the funds, the app owner transfers the app and all related assets, and the funds are released. But there would be a fee on them depending on which escrow agent you'd use. We've actually had a couple of deals now where if they're not bigger ones, the buyer wants to save on the escrow fee and so does the app owner. That's typically, with that fee, you'd split it 50-50 between the buyer and the seller. But we would have a direct transfer of the funds and then the app would be transferred over. Us as the broker in the middle, we'd act as the intermediary there to make sure that the transfer is done. But you'd have, so the commission costs, the escrow costs. And then as well as that, I would always advise if you're doing, it's called the asset purchase agreement, but the full legal document that's basically outlining all of the terms and conditions post-sale, to get a lawyer to review that. To just see that everything there, it's not too strict on yourself for afterwards, and paying that lawyer fee to ensure you have a good contract there. But that's typically the majority of it, Josh, really from the app owner side.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think we've seen the same thing. We try and avoid the escrow services just to not have that extra burden of that cost, but lawyers are a super important one, especially if you're a seller and this is the first time you're selling an app. It's really important to have someone on your side to make sure everything is going smoothly.
Yeah.
Which leads me on to really 2 points of killer advice I give to most app founders if they're looking at selling. The first is your buyer is going to do due diligence on your app. You should do due diligence on your buyer. Check them out, ask around about them. If you're feeling cheeky, you could even LinkedIn message some of them on LinkedIn and talk to them or understand what they think about the company. This is your baby you're selling. At the end of the day, you want it to be in good hands, so don't really leave any stone unturned. And the other kind of piece of advice I also give is if you know the buyer has bought apps in the past, go to those sellers and ask them, like, how was your experience with this buyer? Were they communicative? Were they honest? Were they helpful? Were there any hiccups? Did they help solve problems quickly? Just it can really help also to build the confidence that these guys aren't, shady, and that actually someone else had a really great experience with them. Anything to add there, Charlie, about the kind of tips you might give to sellers to how to do this to the best of their ability?
Yeah, I think the buyer due diligence is really important when you have stuff like, let's say, a deferred payment earn-out agreement. I think there, in terms of understanding how good this actual buyer is at scaling this app, is important to know. Kind of things I would add there is, if they're telling you we're going to grow this app 40-50% over the next year and your payouts tied to that, asking things like, can you tell me where the drivers of growth will come? Can you give me examples of where you've grown an app like this and what sort of tests were carried out to do that? I think just a couple of questions like that are going to be, don't want to put you guys in a tough spot here, Josh, with those sort of questions, but just from the app owner's perspective, you actually understand, okay, what's the viability of them actually growing at this percentage and you getting your extra payout? Because it is something that's becoming more common, or we're seeing a lot earn-out payments being discussed and trying to find some sort of growth threshold there for the payout.
Yeah. No, we're also seeing the same. We're seeing a lot of founders who have belief in the future performance of their app, actually ask for earnouts to be a function of the app. And at that point, then we become really transparently before the deal is closed and say, listen, we want to do X, Y, and Z. We want to kind of mess around with the paywall. We want to change or upgrade the onboarding. We want to experiment with a new channel of user acquisition. And we want to do, I don't know, a new price point or something, and come very transparently pre-deal, just so that our kind of expectations are aligned once the deal is closed.
Yeah, it's I guess it's kind of one thing I wanted to jump into there and how you're seeing it in 2025, or if it's something you guys are open to. But if you see an app owner and they're super bullish on their app, they want to keep working on it. Is it something where you would acquire them but keep them in place, or let them keep working on the business after, or how would that look?
So it really comes down to what works best for both parties. You know, if me, Blue Throne is one party and the developer is another, motivations have to be aligned. Otherwise, you're going to have a deal basically fall apart. So if the founder does want to stay on and they believe in the future potential, and this is actually a really common scenario for us, the founder will say, listen, I had dreams of doing X, Y, and Z, but I'm on my own, so I've only been able to do X. I want your help to do Y and Z. That's a perfect storm. So we'll come in, we'll give them the support, we'll build in an earnout function so that if we do X, Y, and Z, and they hit the revenue targets that we all think they're going to hit, everyone wins, both Blue Throne and the app developer, because of that earnout. On the other side of the coin, a lot of people just want to sell a project so they can go to their next project, or maybe they're trying to make a big purchase in their personal life. They want to buy a new house. They want to have another kid, for example. So at that point, they're just looking for the clean cut, money on the table, take the cash on day one and walk away and do the next thing with their life. We are open to these kind of deals. I mean, there always has to be this technical handover period, which I'm sure you're familiar with from your kind of conversations. But depending on how complex the code base is, there needs to be this period of kind of oversight where the founder will help us understand what's happening here, how do we improve it, did you take any shortcuts, if so, what do we need to fix, etc. So it really does depend. But I'll point to kind of one of my favorite examples, which is one of the first apps we bought over at Blue Throne, had such strong growth potential in the future that we bought it when it was about a 2-man headcount. And as of today, it's at about 16. It's a great example of kind of the owner stayed on. He helped us transfer the app. He stayed on for over a year. We actually brought really top tier talent to the team to help it grow. And I can't say the revenue figures online, but if anyone wants to kind of chase me up on LinkedIn, we can go into the details of what we did over there.
Much better, I'd imagine, anyway, if you've gone from 2 to 16.
Something like that. Otherwise, we're doing something really wrong.
But no, I think as well you see with, like with indie developers in general, a lot of them, they don't want to go into this position where they're managing a huge team, and if your app has that potential, you realistically have to go on that journey, to have a big team to leverage all these different areas where you can across marketing, product. But like an indie developer might just want to code and keep doing the technical stuff. So, someone coming in like that, it gives them the opportunity to keep doing what they're loving, keep doing what they love, but get it to that next level then with the support.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie, this has been such a great chat. I can't wait for the next one we do. I know we've got it booked in the calendar, so I'll see you for that next one.
Sounds good, Josh. Been good chatting with you.